Workers traded off thousands of dollars of income for a few dollars in savings. The mistake hurt everyone. It cut the economic growth rate per person 40% and brought decades of trade deficits. Wage and salary earners used to get about half of GDP. Now they get about 43%. That 7% difference was $1.4 trillion in 2018, or about $9,000 for everyone with a job. The difference over the last 10 years amounts to $83,000 per worker. When half the pie rewarded work, GDP per person grew at 2.6%. The record low incentive to work over the last 10 years coincided with a 1% growth rate. Squeezing workers and weak growth are connected. Your role to fix it begins with understanding. From the time of the New Deal to the 1986 tax reform, GDP per person grew at 2.6%. The 86 reform dropped the top tax rate on personal income below 50%. Growth since trended at 1.6%. If stronger growth had prevailed, GDP per person would be 45% higher. This gap probably means your pay could have been 45% more, and that billionaires squeezing your income also hurt them. Your part of the solution doesn't include pitchforks or socialism, just vote differently about taxes. Tax reform passed with this logical-sounding slogan: if we cut marginal tax rates for business owners, they'll have more money to grow the economy and create jobs. It backfired in weaker growth because with lower marginal tax rates, owners pulled more personal income out of businesses, leaving less money for workers and growth. This will become obvious with the example of Amazon, the share of the income tax paid by the top 1% of taxpayers, and the correlation of growth with tax rates. Wait, let's back up. You probably think the economy is strong because the news media owned by the elites taking the wider slice told you it was, and there's a 50-year low in the unemployment rate. But look at the demographics. Record numbers are leaving the workforce as the baby boom retires, and the declining numbers born from 1990 to 97 are entering the prime working age. Low unemployment is a demographic phenomenon, not a boom. Declining births in 2017 and 2018 to the lowest level since 1986 suggests a fragile economy could be undermining the future of the country. Keep listening and find out how to restore an actual boom. Okay, on to Amazon. For years, Amazon plowed all business revenue into growing the company so there was no income to be taxed by the corporate income tax. It was all spent on employees, equipment, etc. Jeff Bezos' wealth increased by billions without it being taxable income. The growing value of a business is not taxed. So, regardless of the corporate tax rate or the marginal tax rate on personal income, 100% of business revenue is available to grow a business. Actually, more than 100% is available. Growing a new business can be used to shelter revenue from a mature business from being taxable income. The amount of business revenue owners pull out as income shifts the meaning of the wealthy paying most of the income tax. In 1980, the top 1% of taxpayers paid about 19% of the income tax. The top marginal rate was 70%. In 2016, facing a 39.6% top rate, they paid about 37% of the tax. This counterintuitive inverse relationship where a lower tax rate on the wealthy leads them to pay a higher share of the tax occurs because the wealthy pull trillions of dollars more personal income out of businesses when their marginal tax rate is low. We're going to take a bit of time to develop this chart to more fully show the relationship. This will help you understand the charts that follow. A scatter plot of the same data can make the relationship clearer. Each point on the scatter plot comes from 2 points over here. The point for 1980 is plotted at the 70% tax rate and at the 19% share of tax paid. The best fit line slopes down, showing an inverse relationship. We can flip this scale and adjust it to conform to the best fit line. The top tax rate has a leading influence on the share of taxes paid. We can move this axis out a year to show the relationship strengthens with a 1-year lead time. The correlation continues getting stronger out to an 8-year lead time. Now the 37% of taxes paid in 2016 corresponds with the 35% top rate in 2008. We don't want the wealthy to pay more tax. We want them to take less income, pay less tax, and build more wealth in businesses. Workers can't get paid with dollars that are pulled out of the business. The top marginal tax rate that encourages owners to pull more revenue out corresponds with workers getting a smaller share of the pie. The 7-year lead time here is compatible with the 8-year lead time when owners pay the tax. Workers have been trained to give up whole slices of bread for a few crumbs of tax savings. We fall for the lie that tax cuts at the top will help workers because we don't understand how marginal tax rates work. If you haven't done it, calculating your average income tax rate is a good exercise. It's easy. You get your tax return, you take the tax you paid, and divide it by the adjusted gross income. Several years ago, I was in the 22% tax bracket, so my marginal tax rate was 22%, but my average tax rate was 11%. A couple with a $5 million income might use the standard deduction and have their first $24,400 of income be tax-free. On the other hand, they might have $200,000 of itemized deductions, which means their first $200,000 of income would have a 0% tax rate. After the deduction, taxable income begins, and they would pay 10% on the next $19,400 of income, 12% on about the next $60,000, then the 22% bracket would kick in, and so on until taxable income exceeded the top bracket. The couple's marginal tax rate would be the top marginal rate of 37%. There is also a schedule for capital gains income with lower tax rates. The couple would pay tax at all the rates from 0 to 37%. Now we're prepared to understand what tax policy promotes growth. America prospers when our wealthy build and hold most of their wealth in businesses that serve others. The long-term economic growth rate rises and falls with the ratio of business revenue used to run and grow businesses. Income tax policy encourages prosperity when the first several brackets in the tax schedule allow business owners to pull enough income out at a low enough average tax rate that our wealthy have plenty of incentive to run businesses. These low marginal tax rates on the first few brackets also assure the tax does not discourage work. Beyond this needed incentive, a series of higher marginal tax rates at higher brackets make building wealth within a business more attractive than pulling more income from a business. In effect, the marginal tax rate on business owners taxes the dollars not spent building businesses and growing the economy. The marginal tax rate on business owners taxes what is not spent growing the economy. Pairing marginal tax rates with appropriate brackets is critical for growth. This top bracket is 9.8 times 2018 GDP per person. The top bracket has ranged from $28,000 when it was 1.4 times GDP per person to $5 million when it was 8,000 times. Today, 8,000 times would be about $500 million. The strongest correlation to growth is with a 3-year lead time. FDR's $5 million bracket corresponded with 6.8% growth per person. Since tax reform, the top bracket has averaged 7.1 times GDP per person. The growth rate at 1.6% was slightly below the best fit line. Trump's bracket implies growth at 2.1%. In 1965, a major divide occurred. Prior to 65, the top bracket had never been below 100 times GDP per person. Since then, it's never been above 60. We'll refer to this as the high bracket and low bracket periods. Wait, do we have to go through this tedious data? Yes, some people won't accept the message without it. Just remember the top bracket affects growth, the higher the better, and it influences how the top tax rate and capital gains rate impact growth. The top marginal tax rate has the best correlation leading growth by 2 years. It's a Goldilocks relationship, where the robust growth comes when the top tax rate is neither too high nor too low. So far, a top rate below 38% corresponds with periods growing below the 2.1% average. In 2020, we'll start finding out if the 2018 tax cut also leads to below average growth. In the high bracket period, the best growth came with an 81% top tax rate. The best fit curve suggests a 63.9% rate would maximize growth. Values in this line come from the quadratic formula of the fitted curve. For example, the 63% top rate here corresponds with the 7.5% growth estimate here. In the low bracket period, the curve suggests a 54.1% rate maximizes growth. Growth improved after President Reagan cut the top rate from 70% to 50%. The growth optimizing top rate increases with the top bracket. The capital gains tax rate influences growth with a 5-year lead time. The periods influenced by capital gains rate below 18% have had below average growth. In the high bracket period, the best growth came with a 39% tax rate, and the best fit curve suggests a 53.8% rate would maximize growth. In the low bracket period, that 39% rate corresponds with the back-to-back recessions of the early 1980s. President Carter improved growth by cutting the rate to 28%, which is close to the suggested optimal at 28.8. As with the top marginal rate, higher tax brackets increase the growth optimizing capital gains tax rate. If we want strong long-term growth, it helps to hardwire that incentive into the tax code. The strongest 10-year period of growth ever, growing at 10.3%, began in 1934 when the holding period to get the lowest capital gains tax rate was set to 10 years. If properly motivated, CEOs and wealthy elites plan for the long term rather than maximizing short-term income. Since 1984, the top tax rate and capital gains tax rate have both been below the growth optimizing level, and their influence on growth per person can be combined in a linear model. For example, the cut to the top rate in 87 and 88 corresponds to a drop in the model in 89 and 90. This cut to the capital gains rate in 1981 starts impacting the model's growth estimate in 1986. 1984 was the strongest year of growth in the last 67 years and benefited from the tax cuts mentioned earlier by Presidents Carter and Reagan. Since then, tax cuts have been followed by weaker growth and tax increases by stronger growth. Voters have not understood this and punished the tax increasers. President Bush 41 raised the top rate in 1991. We voted him out in 92. A Democratic Congress raised taxes in 93. We voted them out in 94. Another Democratic Congress raised taxes in 2013. We voted them out in 2014. Reagan's record on growth is mixed. While helping bring the strongest growth in decades, these tax cuts harmed growth, mostly under Bush 41, whose 4 years grew at 1%. Reagan raising the capital gains rate back to 28% benefited growth, primarily during President Clinton's 8 years. The 7 years where the influence of the 35% top rate and 15% capital gains tax rate overlapped grew at 0.3%. After the 2-year lag from the 2013 tax increase, 2015 had the second fastest growth of the current expansion. Following the 5-year lag, 2018 had the fastest growth. President Trump's 2018 tax cut suggests growth will weaken slightly beginning in 2020. If you are not yet convinced low top rates harm growth, watch to see what happens to growth in 2020 and beyond. So far, the strongest years of growth in this expansion fall short of what was average prior to tax reform. Low marginal tax rates up through about $150,000 can benefit growth, but cutting the top rate below 50% with tax reform brought the weakest growth since the Great Depression. As citizens and voters, we chose weakness. It's time to forgive ourselves and everyone that supported low top tax rates. They seemed like a good idea at the time. And now we have learned low top marginal rates leave fewer trillions down here, which squeezes workers, real investment, production, and startups. Extra trillions up here lead to more money in politics, inflating asset prices into bubbles, and over-the-top consumption that sucks in imports. A trade deficit means goods flow in and ownership of assets flows out. A low top rate has literally meant selling trillions of dollars of U.S. assets to foreign interests. To better understand all this and fix it, you should read my book, Put Money in Your Pocket. Vote to double your income, build the middle class, and make the 21st century an American century. In the long run, what benefits one benefits all. Working together to unleash an economy that can satisfy everyone includes voting for tax policy that actually corresponds with robust growth. Look for the politicians proposing the highest brackets, preferably in the tens or hundreds of millions. Vote for prosperity and help others too by liking this video, sharing it, and making comments.